Hey everybody, I just wanted to share some thoughts on my perspective on self-talk because I think in this day and age, and what I hear a lot about is people's talk within comes from not only their experience of how they were raised or teachers, parents, uncles, aunts, culture, church, whatever it might be, that embedded kind of thoughts that people get are also from events that happen in our world. And I was thinking about that in terms of terror, that our country has been terrorized. And I think there's a sense of fear on the planet that has been instilled in us for many, many years, and we're not recognizing that. I just remember as a kid, I don't remember John Kennedy dying, but I do remember Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King dying. I was in third grade, and my teacher said at the time, "It's going to be the end of the world." And I think she said it in passing, but for a third grader, I remembered what kind of terror that that brought from me. And terror is very real. It's very real in our world today. If most of us can remember exactly where we were when 9/11 happened to all of those victims, but to us as a country and to us individually. And it has damaged our sense of peace. And that is what terror has brought to us individually and collectively. And I think because of that, that it's important that we need to look at what messages we are giving to ourselves in terms of stagnating our ability to love, to forgive, to be peaceful, and to be present to other human beings. Because I find that our self-talk is wrapped around the fear that we will not be heard, that we will not be saved, and that we will not be peaceful. So that when we listen to people speak, we're ready to answer long before they're done speaking to us. And I know I'm certainly guilty of that. But I think the removal of negative, toxic self-talk depends upon the ability to reflect on a daily basis or on a couple times a day for some people. Think about what's coming to us quite naturally. Is the message that I'm a failure when I complete a job, a test, a talk, anything that has to do with my abilities? Is the message I'm not good enough, it was terrible, I failed? If that's the message we're giving ourselves, then our messages are toxic. However, if our messages are, maybe I didn't do so great, but it's okay. Maybe everyone didn't like my talk, but I certainly did my best. And thank God I can deal with any type of problem that might arise from my ability to not do what I really have done with a certain amount of attachment to good. Because self-talk that is negative, especially around our activities, is rooted in how we have engaged with ourselves for many, many years. And so the removal of that has to do with not just self-esteem, but stopping the tapes within that tell us that we're fat, we're ugly, we're unworthy, and to replace those tapes with I am loved, I am good, I am gifted. And it has to be done in a very, very certain, specific, direct way so that we can get into our subconscious and convince ourselves that the message of a loving God is that we are good and we are created to be good, and that every attempt to be good is filled sometimes with mistakes. but we are not mistakes. And that begins some of the removal. And it takes a lot of time because we haven't been doing that for very long. And I think the self-talk also has to take us to a place where we own what's going on in our own lives every single day. And that is, when events happen that are unfortunate to us, we need to get past the blame. If you're stuck in a place that is constantly saying, I am this way because my parents were horrible, and you're 30 years old or whatever, and you're still blaming your parents, it's time to let that go. It's time to grow up. It's time for you to take control of the self-talk and say, you know what? My parents were not perfect, but I have the ability to change some of the self-talk that I'm living with and some of the messages that I received. Because 30 years ago, the way people spoke to their children is quite different than it is now. And I would bet that 30 years from now, that some of your children will be saying the same things that you're saying. And the bottom line is, we are not perfect. There are people in our lives who give us messages. Sometimes they're out of love. Sometimes they're out of control. Sometimes they're out of fear that you're going to make a mistake. But they make mistakes, and they're human. And in our humanness, we need to connect with their humanness. And that brings us to a point of reconciliation. So whether they're alive or whether they're still in our lives, if we believe that their messages affect us, then we also need to believe that we can come to a point in reflection and in our self-talk to say, no, I'm not a failure. No, I'm not fat. No, I'm not ugly. Yes, I am worth it. Yes, I can succeed. Yes, I am not determined on a diploma, on the money I have in the bank, on a car I drive, on the amount of friends that I have, or any of those things that are exterior. Because at the end of the day, when we recognize our self-talk and we change it, and we work on changing it in a daily way, when we check in with ourselves as we're speaking and we hear ourselves saying can't and should, that awareness says to us, here I go again, and then we should not put ourselves down, but we should kind of, oh well, here I go again. I'm using that talk. Got to change that talk. And planning that in our subconscious will give us the ability to do that. And so our self-talk will change. But just because we're aware of our self-talk doesn't mean it's going to happen in an instant. It takes time. And so as we go through life, if we're not aware on a daily basis that it is only in loving ourselves that we can love other people, it is only in recognizing our self-talk that we can stop perpetuating that self-talk to those around us that we love. So if you start finding yourself, as I do sometimes, reacting in traffic, being impatient in a line at the grocery store, not knowing what to say that's going to be positive, it's an awareness for an opportunity to change. And so in that, I think we can find hope. Because at the end of the day, we always need to remind ourselves it is the quality and care with which we treat ourselves and others. You know that commandment, love of God and love of neighbor, love of self, love our neighbors as ourselves. It's about loving ourselves first. We cannot possibly entertain a relationship that is balanced with love without loving ourselves. It is the greatest journey we'll ever take from here to here.